Hey guys, and welcome to another video. I wanted to quickly go through the patch details over the past couple of days. This has been an interesting period because we kind of had a big patch and then lots of other medium chunky sized ones that came in shortly after. It's not usually like ArenaNet to do things that way, and it is pretty interesting, I guess, that this is what we're seeing and could continue to see over the year instead of what I was originally predicting as just like one big patch every 3 months and then that's pretty much it. So these are good signs and definitely give us some things to talk about and do while we wait for the living world to kick back off. So let's just jump in. Really, this all kicked off with the Lunar New Year being closed out. I never realized, by the way, that during the Lunar New Year, you could have bought the lucky envelopes, just open enough for your daily, if that's what you were going for, and then selling the rest, or even saving the rest to sell on the TP now, and earn a sweet, sweet profit off of them in the end. I had no idea that was a thing until like a couple of days before the end, and by then it was pretty much too late. So that's really what began these changes, and a lot of its refinements, but some's really interesting. First of all, starting off with Ascalon and the Char areas. I have to say, I've been thinking about this place a lot lately. I really like the story in the Ascalon areas, but it's just so short of what it could be. I find myself obsessing over it at the moment. And one of the main things that's kind of lame about the early Char stuff is the Plains of Ashford has basically no events. And it's honestly one of the worst places you can go to try and experience your daily or just hang out. So I find myself there rarer than anywhere else. On a recent Q&A, we even talked about the fact that there's no world boss that exists on that map for a starter region while there is on all the others, and that's a bit of a shame. I also remember the first time I ever played a Char character, there was a badass meta event I experienced where I got to storm Ascalon City against the ghosts, and I really have to go out of my way to experience that now. And I've always kind of thought that the reason I never experienced that too much now is simply because it's not a world boss chain, right? Like, there's no big conclusive boss at the end. There's a champion, but nothing super amazing. Even Tyder Covington probably gets one over on this event, and the point was that it's because there's no incentive there. Well, I'd actually be wrong to think that. Maybe it's just because it was super infrequent from when it would re-pop. And that's a huge problem. Just the other day, at Ascalon City, events came up for my daily, and I found myself forced to do it. What with one of them bugging at the Iron Dock waypoint so that billions and billions of separatists arrive, never to cease. It just kind of gets a bit annoying running around there for so long. Well, they've addressed that. It's crazy to see random Ascalon City updates. But we've even seen one as well for one of the Char story steps in these updates, where the city meta cycle now has been reduced significantly to like 20 or 30 minutes for the loop to begin again. And I believe there's a lot of cool different branching and separate events that come out of this. That's great. It means that now it's much more obvious what events are happening, and hopefully new Char players actually get to experience a high frequency of events. It's a funny idea, but obviously in an MMO you've got some notion of population balance across your races, right? Like, so like the human female meta is real because most people have a human female somewhere. And unfortunately on most of the polls you tend to see that the Char come at the very bottom of the totem pole. As unique and cool as they are, and especially us Guild Wars 1 fans, I'd say, feel like this great nostalgia and love for them in some sense, they tend to come very low. They're not super well played. And I wonder how much of that is because of the Char design themselves, or is it because of their map design, because of the unintuitively laid out Black Citadel and the lacking events in, at the very least, the Plains of Ashford. It's a funny thing, and maybe we'll see some more Char this time over the next 2 to 3 years. Who knows? So the second patch, the compact drama, finally comes to its conclusion. So you guys remember I talked about an episode of Guild Chat quite recently where Ruby talked about this and it really sparked up, I would say, way too much discussion on a small thing, but the decision of where the compact button in your inventory would go, does it remain near deposit collectibles? Well, they went a step beyond what the Guild Chat episode initially commented on, which was just to move it down on the list, because apparently, guys, this tiny little thing of moving it down on the list was a bad change. So instead, the devs tried to appeal to everyone. I think this is actually, if anything, a very good example of ArenaNet's incredible sensitivity to the community, even over minor things, all right? So what they've done is, in the options now, there is now a checkbox, a toggle button, which means while it's toggled on, it moves the compact button to the bottom, and while it's toggled off, it remains where it once was. It's basically the perfect solution. Nobody can really complain about this, except unless you're on the train of, oh, this is too much UI bloat in the options. And it is kind of true that ArenaNet can't keep adding options like that, because eventually you're going to be playing a game where you go in the options like, what the hell are all these checkboxes? What's all this arbitrary crazy stuff? In fact, I reckon a good 5 out of 10 people you speak to wouldn't be able to identify all of the options in their option menus. Maybe that ratio is higher already. And as time goes by and more of these come in, it's going to be a bit weirder. But yeah. So, some great news for the start of the patch notes. Some sad news now. Crab Toss has been replaced temporarily, apparently so, by Keg Brawl in the activity rotation. I'm picking my favorite stuff about these patch notes to talk about here. Yes, I'm condensing, and you might think, this is really interesting. Yes, it is interesting, damn it. I love Keg Brawl, don't get me wrong, but you know what I also love? I love Crab Toss. Crab Toss is cool! And I feel like this is kind of like the nail in its coffin here. So those who don't know the full story, Crab Toss, yes, was not the most loved of the activities. It's one that you could get really good at, though, if you practiced it and you really thought about it, and you had the awareness to watch where your CCs were coming from on your opponents and so on, and you timed your dodge rolls against the little Karka hatchlings. It was a great activity that I think was undervalued by people in general. But somehow, recently, ArenaNet broke it. They broke it in such a way that basically the first person to pick up the crab, as long as they avoid CCs and dodge roll the hatchlings correctly, they will never lose. Why? Because pretty much all the items that would steal the crab and the main skill that is in use there, I would say, the skill 1, which allows you to take the crab from your opponent, were broken. So you have this game where it's like the entire premise is stealing the crab from other people, and you can't steal the crab. You just have to hope that that player's bad enough that they, get themselves killed, and then you nab the first one quickly when Evan throws it back into the arena. How outrageous is that? So it was a completely broken minigame. I don't know, first of all, how it breaks in such a way. There's always funny moments like this with Guild Wars 2 where you really get to experience the spaghetti code nature of some of their coding. I'm not going to pretend that I understand the first thing to be able to criticize something like that. And it is funny when, a change will happen in a completely separate area of the game, and all of a sudden, Crab Toss is broken. I specifically remember the first time I really got to grips with this kind of breaking with the Triple Trouble worm. Once upon a time, the other worm, who shares many animations with Triple Trouble, that spawns in the Caledon Forest and is nonetheless not a difficult boss. This worm had a bug where if a Mesmer cast feedback on it during one of its big projectile attacks, that Mesmer would blow the worm up instantly. I'm talking a thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of health world boss that you as a single Mesmer could instantly nuke with a single ability just because you reflected all of his stuff back at him. Really cool for the Mesmer, but not everyone else who wanted to tag the event for their world boss contribution. And so ArenaNet fixed it. But when they fixed it, what they did was they changed the projectiles of that boss to not be reflectable. Sounds like a good fix, but then over on the Triple Trouble worm side of things, this meant that one of the main mechanics you couldn't play with anymore, and Triple Trouble, which was already designed to be very hard, completely broke itself. And it was like, oh, they changed one thing in a different area of the game and it's broken something else, and obviously they didn't foresee it. And, you just see this with Crab Toss as well. I'm sure they must have made a change to some kind of stealing mechanic, made it not work, and then that broke Crab Toss too. It always reminds me of their original comments when designing Guild Wars 2, where they were talking about how enemies wouldn't have player skills anymore, because enemies having player skills made Guild Wars 1 insanely hard to balance, because they would balance something for PvE, and then all of a sudden a random mob in a random map, or a random pack of mobs in a random map in PvE, are basically impossible to pass by. Can you imagine that, guys? PvP balance affecting PvE story missions. Yeah, we were in that situation before they started doing the splitting, and it still wasn't entirely resolved. So I remember them saying that they were going to keep everything separate, and bugs like this still seem to exist where they've doubled up on things. But hey, I do hope that Crab Toss comes back. Obviously, this is the idea here, that Crab Toss will be fixed and then it will come back and not just be obliterated and replaced with Keg Brawl. And at least we've got to give kudos to ArenaNet for one thing. They replaced it with Keg Brawl, the absolute best of the other activities, and not any of the other stinky ones. Next, I want to talk about a small change in raids, and it's funny how much discussion we're going to get out of this. The patch note is that they added adrenal mushrooms near the rally points in the raid, Spirit Vale, and presumably all future ones as well. This is a great change. This is what I honestly expected them to have always been doing. Before the game even came out, this seemed obvious when we did our first raid beta testing. So let's lay the picture out for you guys. The idea of raids is you have these individual little encounters that are hyper difficult, but not too long to attempt, right? Like, maximum killing some of these bosses, you're going to be in there for like 12 minutes, maximum. Failing, when you're learning them, and you go and you die, you go and you go and you die, you go and you die, you're probably, sometimes it's only like a 3-minute attempt. So the idea is it's very rapid. Like, you try it, you assess what went wrong if you failed, and then you can go in again, and then you can go in again, and you can go in again. And so we heard about this design, and then we also heard that in the raids there'd be mushrooms and things that interacted with masteries that wouldn't be required necessarily, you know, to max a mastery to complete the raid, but they'd help out. And we heard about adrenal mushrooms. Adrenal mushrooms you train as the last thing in the mastery, and they instantly refresh all your skill cooldowns. So it seemed like an obvious thing that the devs were doing, that these two ideas would be paired, and right before each encounter, hey, there's some adrenal mushrooms. So if you max the mastery, everyone can refresh their skills and then run in again and make it a more frequent attempts, basically. But their actual chance of winning when they're in there doesn't change, right? So there's not a crazy weight on the mastery, but it does help you. Seems perfect. Then the raids released, and they didn't do that at all. The only adrenal mushrooms were on like one of the easier encounters, and that's basically it, in the middle of the encounter. Just like, why? Why did they do that? Well, they finally added them in, and maybe now it's obvious why they didn't do that. Now, yes, you get to instantly refresh all your cooldowns and push in as a group very quickly, but also it's a little bit exploity-ish. So, a separate story that's been going on with the raids that has been really cool and a functionality I've very much enjoyed is to do with necromancers. Now, funny enough, I actually did a video with Bootsbad, a Bootsbad build on a Necro tank build, where we got in a huge discussion about this ages ago now. It was easily over a month ago, that never ended up getting published. But basically, here's the idea. You guys have seen me do it in a lot of my videos. You, on a Necromancer, can pop Lich Form to drop a mark on an enemy. If there's an enemy to pop the mark on, it will summon 4 Jagged Horrors. Unlike the traded Jagged Horrors you get, which are these little mini minions that spawn, apply small amounts of bleeds whenever someone dies, these don't actually have a cap on the amount you can have. So, because of the cooldown of Lich Form and the fact that Lich Form used to destroy your minions when you went into it, it used to be like perfectly finely balanced. But now, because of adrenal mushrooms, if you have an enemy to pop the mark on, you can keep rolling more and more and more Jagged Horrors out. And as long as your druid or your dedicated healer, your dedicated support, whoever that might be, is actually healing the Jagged Horrors to keep them alive, it's a lot like the pre-Heart of Thorns Rise build I talked about, where you can keep swarming more and more of these minions up. Each one applies a little bleed, and eventually you can stack tons of them. This has always existed for the raids. This is something I've been doing in the raids. It's meant that our first attempt on, say, Gorseval has always been a little bit easier because I have like 20 minions as we run in. And our first attempt at Sabbatha has always been a little bit easier because, again, I have 20 minions as I run in from the bandits before. And to me, not only do I feel this isn't horrendously broken, but I actually think it is the most fun I've ever had on a Minimaster in Guild Wars 2. It's exactly that kind of building up an army as you slaughter your enemies, momentum-style gameplay that I loved about Minionmancing in the first game and never really got to experience in GW2. So I like it a lot. But now we come to the adrenal mushrooms change, and all of a sudden it's a little bit less balanced. Why is it a little bit less balanced? Because you can leave an enemy up and quite easily, before every single attempt, continue to spawn tons and tons of Jagged Horrors. And now, instead of the adrenal mushrooms being like, it speeds your team up, now it's like, oh, let's wait ages for the necromancers in our group to eat like 10 adrenal mushrooms so they can get tons of Jagged Horrors, and then finally we can charge in. And now they've got so many minions, it's kind of cheesing the fight out. And what I would have been really scared of from this situation is ArenaNet then turn around and saying, oh, well, we have to nerf the Jagged Horror thing. We'll nerf the entire idea into the ground. We'll just add a cap on the amount of Jagged Horrors. And that would have been born purely out of the adrenal mushroom thing, rather than just the idea in the first place. So it does seem ArenaNet knew that people were doing this, because very quickly after that original change, they removed a bunch of spawns, enemy spawns, before Gorseval. And they did this in a subsequent patch, clearly to stop the Necromancers being able to drop the mark and spawn the Jagged Horrors, except they didn't quite do a fully complete job, because you can still drag the champion from like even further back in the raid all the way up before the Gorseval fight and do the exact same thing again. It's a little bit more fiddly now though. I don't know. I hope that basically this remains in the game. It's just that they change the enemy spawn so it's not so easily accomplished. Because I do like that momentum style of play. I just think maybe it's a little bit too overtuned now, specifically because of the adrenal mushroom change, which is a whole interesting story. I'd be interested in what you guys think of it. In the end, we're talking about a niche activity in already a niche area of the game. Doesn't really affect too many of us, and it's just a bit of fun, maybe, and that's the best we can look at for this wing. But when it comes to Salvation Pass and when it comes later, I really don't want to feel like I'm being encouraged into this crazy, you know, oh, let's just wait ages and just spam up loads of these. And I also don't want ArenaNet to nerf it into oblivion. So we'll see what happens. All right, moving on very quickly. Let's talk about mastery vendors now selling obsidian shards. So this is a change that means all of the Heart of Thorns guys will now just give you obsi shards for their currencies. And, I don't know, I guess it's quite nice for people who want obsidian shards. It's more opportunity to get them. You'll notice that actually in both Dry Top and the Silver Waste, there was a high amount of obsidian shard acquisition in there. And maybe they did this to try and make the Heart of Thorns maps feel a little bit more rewarding as well. I've actually been doing a lot of the Heart of Thorns achievements lately. That's been a bit of fun and made them feel rewarding. But once those achievements are gone, I mean, hell, I don't do any adventures and things anymore anyway. Perhaps this is just a little bit to make those maps feel slightly more rewarding. I'm kind of interested, though, how very slowly and steadily over time, there has been less and less importance on the Balthazar event chain. Probably my favorite things of design in Guild Wars 2 at launch, one of them was the idea that you could have this super difficult, really, really challenging open world event chain, and the only way to get obsidian shards in the entire game was through Balthazar. And now there's just so many ways to get obsidian shards. He's just not necessary anymore. Neither is the chain difficult for what it's worth at that. So, but we've done the discussions on why they may be moving away from open world difficult stuff already a few times. So there's more obsidian shard access. I don't know how much I really care beyond that. I mean, there don't seem to be very many obsidian shard sinks in the game, frankly. Maybe there'll be more though, and this is the main thing I'd like to bring your attention to, guys. Legendary armor. In Guild Wars 1, the hardest armor to get was obsidian armor, and it was the sink for obsidian shards. Well, I don't know. It seems like it would make a lot of sense for ArenaNet to be thinking a bit more about legendary armor right now, and thinking about adding more obsidian shard sinks to the game, and legendary armor having a hell of a lot of obsidian shards in it. That could be a good idea. I like it. Come on. It's perfect. Speaking on the legendary topic as well, they apparently, I didn't know this was broken, but this is a good example of the expansion not tying into core systems well enough. There was always in Guild Wars 2 an achievement to get 5 legendary weapons. Cool achievement. I've always wanted to see it be pushed up a bit higher, especially over time as more people get more legendaries. And that's not because I'm anytime soon expecting to get 10 or 15 or more legendaries than that. I just think it's one of those cool systems that if somebody does go to that effort, they have something cool to show off with it. And you'd expect that an achievement like this would be updated, maybe expanded upon, or looked at the very least with an expansion, right? Well, it wasn't, and it was kind of broken in that if you made a Heart of Thorns legendary weapon, in many ways more impressive than a classic legendary weapon, it wouldn't even count for the legendary collector achievement. So that's been patched, and I guess it's just a nice little segue there. A weird change. You guys might not understand why it happened, but I'll tell you my opinion on it. They originally, when you made a new character, you obviously start with a little bit of gear on you, and the patch notes express that that is now no longer salvageable. Well, that's pretty stupid, to be honest. You might think, wow, who was actually salvaging that stuff? The truth is, you could earn a little bit of money by doing this. And I don't know, maybe if you had an ultra-fast SSD and your idea of fun is to spam through character creation, you could earn a little bit of money off of this. But it was so mind-numbing. I actually think that the main reason this has been nerfed is, and why now? I think it's only been nerfed now because the devs have only just realized it's a thing, but I think that it could be just because of the bottable nature of it, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that you might be able to have bots functioning doing, and once again, another thing, a low-level farm, just like key farming, rest in peace. I never did a video on this one, though, so, hey, maybe we shouldn't care too much. Quick change as well to some skills. I won't talk about all of them, but one that I do find kind of funny is the 2 skills, Coalescence of Ruin and Scorched Earth. These were both very powerful before, in that if you had an enemy that had a very, very big hitbox, and you cast these abilities, the hitbox could get tapped twice by the same skill, or even 3 times by the same skill, and end up doing a lot of damage. the main one you want to look at isn't Coalescence of Ruin, which is the hammer ability on Revenant, but is more Scorched Earth. This is what the longbow berserkers were using to paint the ground with fire, and especially on Gorseval, it meant they did massive burning condition damage, and this was kind of the primary build, I believe, that swung the Gorseval fight for a lot of pugs in the early days of Spirit Vale to go from, oh, I can't complete this, to, oh, we now can complete it fairly comfortably just as soon as this got out. It was incredibly strong. So a while back, ArenaNet nerfed it so that it would only tick once. So it didn't matter if this giant hitbox was in 3 little areas that would qualify for damage. It would only tick the burning once, and suddenly this reduces Condi Berserker's damage way down, at least to what ArenaNet actually expected it to be, I suppose. But the way that they actually applied this change to both of these skills meant that if you had 2 different players, say 2 different Hammer Revenants, who both used the Hammer skill, Coalescence of Ruin, at the same time, one of the players just flat out wouldn't hit the enemy. This immediately got found out. There was a funny video on it, and they basically now fixed that issue. I did want to talk about that whole story there. I feel like that's the final chapter, and we're now at the end of the timeline here, where there's probably not going to be too many more changes going on. That's pretty much it, guys. There are some other small things. There was a World versus World issue where you could use the new squad UI stuff to tag enemies. You'd see them forever, which apparently has now been fixed. The Warhorn sound effects on exclusive Warhorn sound effect weapons now actually plays for Tempest. You'd think I'd care more about that, especially since I've been playing Dagger Warhorn Tempest a lot lately. But this now means my Howler actually plays the Howler sounds, or the Super Adventure Box Warhorn if I put that on, and all those, which I guess is quite nice, but I doubt I'm going to reskin the Howler anytime soon. And basically just a lot of changes to the Shatterer, fixes for things. One of the coolest things about the Shatterer that I regret I never looked into, and I could have galvanized a bunch of people to do this on a stream, but there was actually an achievement to break his break bar that, because of scaling, was insanely difficult to do post-patch. Now, some people really organized together and tried their best to break the break bar. The funny thing is, it was actually kind of easy if you managed to manipulate the mega server system into getting a low man run, which kind of diminished the coolness of getting that achievement earlier. But now that's just been patched, and a lot of little tweaks to the new Shatter encounter that just weren't quite spot on before have been changed. And that's basically it. A few gem store changes. They're still throwing the wings out, and people keep buying them. And interestingly, there's a wedding preparation package. The only reason I call this out, I don't usually like talking about gem store stuff too much, but the only reason I call this out, why would they do a wedding preparation package now? What's the odds, maybe, that wedding Aryan Lion's Arch I thought was going to be used in Heart of Thorns may actually get used in the Living World? And what's the odds that the spring seasonal patch brings Living World, and it starts with a wedding? I don't know, like a Marjorie Casimir marriage in LA? That'd be kind of interesting. I wonder how people will take to that. There's been a lot of people claiming the writers are incompetent and they're just social justice warriors and so on lately, and I wonder how they'll take to something like that. I think it'll be interesting, though. Am I reading into the gem story a little bit too much? I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys. But there you go. That's the latest from GW2. I'll keep you in the loop, as always. Thanks very much for watching. I've got a cool video tomorrow for you about some of the more difficult Heart of Thorns achievements and my experience in really rounding some of that stuff out. So I'll see you then. Until then, though, guys, have a great day. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.